Welcome to episode 3 of the Tele build. Today is going to be about final details, wiring, routing, output jacks. We're going to round over the bodies. This body is going to get binding on it. We've got to attach the fretboard to the neck, side marker dots. We've got to shape the neck, thickness the headstock, holes for tuning pegs. Like I said, a lot of work to pack into one episode. I do want to remind everybody, if you're in the market for radius sanding beams, right now we have a pre-order going on. It's 10% off. They will never be this cheap again. The price will go up as soon as we get the items in stock from our anodizer. So take advantage of that if you're in the market. If you're not in the market, that's okay too. We have a lot of work to do today, so let's get right after it. On this guitar, I'm going to put a 1-inch roundover on the bottom. This is going to be a little bit more like a Strat roundover, and I just want it to be more comfortable. I've got a template set up here. I want to recess this switch plate. I'm not going to have a pick guard on this guitar, so I didn't want this sticking out. I wanted it flush with the face of the guitar. So I created a little template and cut it out of acrylic here, and I may sell these if people are interested. If not, no big deal. I'm going to get my pattern bit set up on my router, and then I'm going to test this out on a piece of scrap wood. Let's talk binding. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch. Boop. It's just a little bit bigger than 1/4 of an inch. It's supposed to be, I think, 100 thousandths thick. It's like 92, 93, something like that. I'm going to use the Stu Mac binding router set. And it's like playing Battleship. You look at how deep you want your channel to be, and then it tells you what bearing you need. So for 90 thousandths, I need a 740 bearing. And that's what I've got attached to the top of their router bit. You want to stretch the binding across, but you want to make sure that you leave just a little bit of binding proud when you route. But first, we'll try this on a test piece of wood to make sure that it's all correct. And with the binding in it, the binding sits almost perfectly flush from the side, like any amount of sanding will bring that in. And then it's just slightly proud on the top. marked the center of my binding, and there's no glue anywhere. I just want to get it wrapped around the guitar so I can put a little bit of heat in a few areas. We've got to put a few holes in here for the electronics wiring, and this route is to carry the wires from this pickup to here. And in the old days they could have just used a long bit, but they routed it, so that's how we're doing it. A little bit more traditional. So we're just gonna, this is a 1/4 inch bit, it's a brad point so it won't slip, and we're just making sure that we don't hit this piece of the guitar. So we're staying up off of that. The next step is to come from this cavity into the control cavity. I call this the wiring cavity and the control cavity. I don't know if that's the right word or not. There we go. And then the last one is from this pickup cavity into our controls cavity. Got our fretboard clamped, just temporarily clamped here to the neck, and taking great pains to check and recheck the center lines and make sure they are lined up as perfectly as we can line them up. And we know, because we've done this before, when the glue starts going, it is very difficult to keep the neck from sliding around, and in fact I would tell you it's impossible. And so what we're doing is drilling a couple holes, not too deep, because Lord knows you don't want to accidentally realize that you've gone too far when you're shaping the neck. But, you know, through the fretboard and then another little bit. So we'll hammer these. You just put them right in where the frets go, and then we're going to cut them off right at the fretboard for now. And that should allow us to lift this neck up, and then we'll trim them down just a little bit further. We will cut them off. So there's just a tiny bit sticking up. Come on, buddy. There it is. That's perfect. It also keeps it from going north and south. We made sure to get the nut lined up as well. So now we're going to spread a little glue. There it goes. Looking again, making sure all the lines are lined up. They got to be perfect at this point in time. This is your last shot. I like these squeeze clamps because I can put a ton of them on here, and there's just a little pressure on each one of them, but it's enough that I feel like it does a really good job of clamping down a fretboard. I like to trim the fretboard to the neck, so this is when I do that. And I'm going to do it with the same flush trim bit that I used on the bodies and to shape these necks on the template. And I've got it high enough so that the bottom bearing is going to contact the neck, and it's low enough that it's not a huge amount of finger danger there. You don't want to get your fingers in there, but this is my least favorite route to do on an entire guitar. It's just, the neck's not very wide and this is exposed. It's just kind of, it's just kind of one of those things. But we're going to approach it carefully and methodically, and we're going to get this done. It's going to be awesome. I've got it so that the dots, the center line for the dots are right in the middle of the edge of the fretboard, and then we're just going to mark each of those locations to drill. I have a stick of white 16th inch fret marker material. It's just round PVC, I think is what it is, and a 16th inch drill bit. You don't have to drill in very far, just far enough to give it enough tooth there. So we'll line it up. The next thing we need to look at is the thickness of the headstock, and it's just a little bit over 1/2 inch. On my template, I have it marked at 550 is what I've measured several Fender headstocks at. So it's about 50 thousandths over 1/2 inch. So I just have my neck set in a vise, and I've got my ruler set at 1/2 inch, and we're just going to mark right on the end of that ruler in a couple places here. And then we'll stay proud of that line over on the bandsaw. When you look at the templates, you'll also see 3 lines. There's the front of the nut, the back of the nut, and this third line represents where on a Fender neck they stop the curve. When we bandsaw, we're going to saw it to where it's flat here and will stop. And that basically lines up just in front of this little knob here that Fender puts on. Then we'll use an oscillating drum sander to clean up this radius here. I can't stress enough how important test cuts are. I know when I film these videos, it looks like I just walk up in the machine and you just let it rip and it's magically perfect. It's never that way. Let me tell you, I set up for these shots and all of these cuts in gory detail behind the scenes. And this was my test block for here. I took my calipers and measured. It's at 590, and we really want this 550 at the end. So I've got to take off about 40 thousandths, and I'd much rather have this proud than too shy, because you can't put wood back on. You can, but you can't. We're just going to go really slow, making sure that we have pressure against this fence at all times. And then when we get to our stop mark, we're going to stop a little short. I may finish this by hand and then cut across here to get this piece loose. I used my steel rule and my marking knife to mark a line to keep me straight where the cut is from the bandsaw. And it should just take a few cuts here with this little saw. There she goes. I've got the spindle spaced further away than this neck, and I'll tighten that gap when I get to a rough dimension, and we'll sneak up on the fit. I want to turn my attention now to scraping this binding. You can see there's a little bit of glue left on the surface and the binding is a little bit proud. I've just got a simple card scraper. You can use a razor blade if you don't have a card scraper, and basically you're just pulling along the binding and getting these little curls here. The razor blade does a slow job at it, and the card scraper can go fairly quickly and take off a fair amount of material. You want your card scraper to sit flat to the surface this way, and then you angle it toward yourself and you put a burr on there. There's all kinds of videos about how to sharpen card scrapers, but essentially that's what you do. It's real simple. My Bigsby hardware pulled out. I installed my pickup because I wanted to make sure however I rotate this will fit in that pocket. Every once in a while you get a pickup that's made different or something's just a little off, and you have to make sure you're on the right track. So what I'm doing is I'm putting this bridge, I've got the center line of my guitar going right through that middle hole. And then I'm measuring here, and we'll pull out the magnifier. That's right where I want it. So I'm going to take my trusty pencil and just give myself some lines here to follow. So I'm just putting a center mark here. Then the tremolo is going to sit back behind there. And I've got it centered up. I'm looking at the center line, then putting that between the D and G strings. And then I need to make sure this is square. Just shy of 8 3/16. Just shy of 8 3/16. So we've got the sleeves in. We've got all the holes drilled for the hardware. And we've got the holes drilled for the Bigsby back here. The neck carve is what keeps a lot of people away from building a guitar from scratch. They're afraid of the complexity and the understanding it takes to make a good neck. But we're going to go through the calculations here, the geometry of what it takes to make a good neck. And the first thing I did was take the template that's included with the kit, and I traced out the neck profiles from the 12th fret and from the 1st fret. Then I took an arbitrary 5/16 inch dimension from the fretboard up and drew a 45-degree line to see where that would intersect with a 1-inch thick fretboard. It just turns out that 5/16 of an inch from the center line is where it hits. So we've got 5/16 at the base, 5/16 at the top, and then this little triangle is what we have to remove between them. On the 1st fret profile, I took 5/16 as well, traced it up to the 1-inch thick line, and it's 3/16 of an inch, so slightly smaller, but that gives us our taper from the 1st fret to the 12th fret. Now we need to transfer our 1st fret location to the back of the neck. And we need to do the same thing at the 12th fret. So scribe the line there that indicates where the 12th fret is, and that's where we measure for our taper. Then we measure 3/16 at the 1st fret away from the center line on both sides. And we go to the 12th fret and we measure 5/16 and make a mark. Then the last thing to do is connect the dots and draw lines all the way down the back of the neck. Then we'll transfer 5/16 of an inch up from the fretboard, and that will show us where our carve is when we connect those two lines. We'll take our back of headstock template, align it with the center line on the back of the neck, and then we'll simply trace around the end of it to get where the cheeks of the carve meet the headstock. We'll do the same at the heel end of our guitar, placing the template on the center line and then tracing around the end of the template. So when we look at what you actually have to carve, it's only about 14 inches worth of neck, so just over a foot. It's really not that daunting when you look at the amount of real estate that you have to cover. I've got another simple shop jig. It's about 21 inches long, and then the bottom board there that makes the T is about 4 to 5 inches shy on either side. And we're going to use that to clamp the neck down as we carve it in our vise. I like to use the Shinto rasp. It has a coarse and a fine side, and there are knockoffs out there, but I would suggest getting the real deal Shinto. It's about $25. I'll probably leave a link in the description below. And essentially what we're going to start doing is just connecting the taper line that's 5/16 there at the 12th fret and the line toward the fretboard, which is 5/16 up from the fretboard. Even though the video speeds up here in just a second, you can see how deliberate I am making sure that the two lines are going to connect and that we don't go over our marks. After we get the 12th fret done, we turn our attention to the first fret. And then once that's done, we fill in the blanks and just make a nice smooth transition from 1 to 12. Then we start on the details, carving the cheeks, and we're almost ready to carve the thickness of the overall neck. I like to take the thicknessing in sections. So I do a groove at the first fret and at the 12th fret and get them just a little bit above where they're supposed to be. So these are at 0.9 inches, both of these, and we're supposed to wind up at 875. So just 15 thousandths of an inch proud, which is like 5 sheets of paper maybe. And then I'll go in sections through here, like probably 1, 2, 3 sections, and get all of those sections level, and then we'll connect all the dots. I'm constantly watching this edge to make sure it's supposed to taper. If it starts to straighten out and lose that taper, it means I'm low here and I'm high here. And if it gets too much taper, that means just the opposite. And I'm watching side to side too, to make sure I don't have an angle on it. I would say this is the most tedious part of shaping a neck, is just making sure that everything measures right at every point along the path. But just being real, this is maybe 15, 20 minutes worth of work. So we're at 0.9 on this end, and we're at 9:15 on the other end. So we just need to take a little off here and connect that dot, right? 905 and 905, that's where we're going to leave it. Beautiful. So we've just got to take off these little caps here and get all these dots connected. The next thing that you can do here is we can divide these facets in half. So basically by eyeball, just taking a look, and again, this is rough stuff, but taking a look, just kind of getting these facets even all the way down. So we'll do that on both of these. What we're looking for, and I'm hoping you can see this as I rotate slowly, is you just want the lines between the facets to be fairly straight. We will make sure this neck is nice and even as we continue to carve it. And I can see on this one, this line is right here and it looks good. This line is way too high, so I need to put a little more angle on this, and then we'll be ready to do the cheeks. The last thing that we're going to do is we're going to take this cheek down, and this is probably the smallest amount of removal that we'll do. What we want to do is basically connect the edge of the fretboard with about 1/8 of an inch up here. So we could even draw a line if we want to, about right there. Like that. So we will connect fretboard and that line. We'll turn our attention to the headstock and starting to form the transitions here. One from the back of the neck and then the two cheeks here. I've got these rasps that are on Amazon. I think they're like 15 bucks for the pair. I didn't expect much. There's some very expensive dragon's tongues that you can get that are $100+ a piece. These are really good if you're just starting out, and I think they'll last a long time. I've got just a little bit of experience with them, but they're a medium, which I think is perfect for a beginner. Sometimes when you get into the really coarse types of removal, you can make mistakes in a hurry. And if you've got a little bit finer file, you'll make mistakes a lot slower and you'll be able to catch them as you're making them. The one thing that I do want to say here is make sure this is going to be just a little bit of a curve, just a nice soft curve. It's easy to dig in. We don't want to dig in. We want to leave the curve just a little bit proud so that we can sand it in. If you undercut it, then you're going to have to take the whole neck down. So you just want to approach this nice and easy. And sometimes on rasps, if you pull first, it makes it a little bit easier. But you'll see these clear, even the mediums, clear material in a hurry. And the back side of this is curved just a little bit. You could use a rat tail file for this as well. I know a lot of those files are intended more for metal work than they are for woodwork, but you can use them on wood. You won't get arrested, I swear. So you can see I've got just a little step right there, and I want to maintain that step. Now on your 50th neck, you may not want to do that. You may want to just go for it. But we're going to leave it nice and proud there, and it's just a tiny little step. Just barely feel it with your fingernail. But that's all you need right there, just that little transition. That's as hard as it gets. Now, on these cheeks, we are gonna wanna make a really nice transition. This one's where your thumb is. And if there's one transition that you're just gonna be mental about, it's this one right here. And this transition goes all the way to the fretboard, just so we're clear. I'm not going completely up to the line. We will finish those later and get right to the line, but right now we're just roughing things out. Again, we don't want to undercut any of these at this minute because that will cause trouble down the line. That's getting pretty close. So I think with our tough tools that we've got here, we'll probably call that side done for rough. And we'll finish the rest of it with sandpaper. We'll concentrate on this cheek next. So there we go. Again, just kind of rough. And constantly feeling it like a guitar neck. Like I said, this one right here is the main one. And then underneath, not quite as important. You still want it nice. But this one here's got to be just perfect or everybody will notice. Now, down here at the heel, this is where all your solo lead players will lambaste you if you screw it up. But it's very, very simple because it's symmetrical on both sides. And again, we're going to put a little bit of curve just right here at the transition, and we're going to make sure that we don't cut it lower than the cuts we've already made that are flat down the neck. Let's talk a little bit about sanding. You can see my arsenal sitting out here. I like to use DuraBlocks because I have an automotive background, and this is what you use to block out a car. And a lot of people want to take a block and do this with it on a guitar neck. And if you take a block that's this size and use it like this, it won't facet. It'll clean the facets because you have a straight reference line across here. So that will give you a straight reference line all the way down, and it'll show up all your low spots. If you do this, it can create new low spots, especially with a smaller block. You want to use the biggest block you can because that gives you the best reference. This applies specifically when you're using heavier grits. When you get down into 320, it's not going to take off that much material at 320, so you don't have to worry as much. But we're constantly going to be feeling. A lot of times if you just close your eyes and feel, it'll tell you more than if you open your eyes. You can use a white glove or a towel, and that will amplify what you're feeling. I've done enough body work on cars. My hands are pretty sensitive to all the different lumps and bumps as we go. I've got a couple other things. My spindle sander, these are just tubes from the spindle sander. This is another DuraBlock that you can use, and then there's a handful of other things. You can always use dowels. You can use your fingers to get into spots like this. I like to start with a round reference if I can, and then move to my fingers once I get the lines established. You can use hose from your automotive store. They have tons of sizes of hose. You can wrap those hose in sandpaper. So that is, that's how hard it is right there. It's not very hard if you rough it in nice. We'll do this side too. And we're just taking out those rasp marks, sanding down to a flatter, smoother surface. Not taking off a ton of material, just blending and transitioning. That's what this step is all about, is blending. I'm going to put some 180 grit onto my block here. This is PSA, pressure sensitive adhesive paper, so it's just self-stick. And then we're going to and those facets are already gone. We're starting to get into the rasp marks. That's feeling pretty good. The last part that we're going to do, we've gotten all of the scratches out, and you have to do yourself a huge favor. You got to be honest. If you see a little scratch, you get it out. you don't want to wait, but the neck is super smooth now. So I've got a piece of 180. It's covered in dust so that the adhesive doesn't stick to your hands. All you got to do is just put it down in the sawdust and it won't stick to you. And then we're just going to shoe shine it. And that will take all of the remaining facets, if there are any, completely out of the neck. And I feel one little spot here that I don't really like. Still not digging it. Now, when I use a smaller block, you'll notice I do an X pattern. So I'll push and I'll pull, and it's so that your reference is always longer than your sanding block. And again, this is being honest with yourself. You can say, oh, I think the paint will cover that up, or I think I'll get it when I'm doing 320, or whatever excuse you want to come up with. Believe me, I've had them all. And the right answer is you fix it in 180 so that it feels like the rest of the guitar. And then when you get to 320, it'll be perfect. It'll be so much easier. 180 removes material so much faster than 320 does. Now I'm feeling the edges of the fretboard and how they transition onto the neck. You don't want the edges of the fretboard just straight up and down. You can sand all the way to the end of the fretboard. Let's go for one more polish on the 180. Oh yeah, we're ready for 320. So the last bit of sanding we're going to do on the neck is with 320, and I've got a soft pad here. There's a really soft side and a sort of soft side. We're using the sort of soft side, just wrapping the paper around. All we're doing here, people say we're removing scratches. No, we're leveling down to the bottom of the scratch from the 180, and then we'll be rounding all the corners, just kind of softening those up, because when you polish a guitar, you don't want any hard edges or that finish will fail. We are completely sanded in 320 now, and I ditched the soft block to get into some of the tight corners. One of the things, little pro tip there, one of the things I look for is a lot of people play an E, and the 12th fret, if you just put your fingers on the 12th fret and then look where your thumb lands, it lands right in that transition. So as you're checking your work, that's one of the more important spots, is just that little 1x1 area back there. And then obviously up here where your thumb sits for the cowboy chords and stuff. Everything's important, but those are the ones that I always like triple check and just, hey, is there anything weird going on there? But we are now ready to clean this up and head for paint. Man, that was a ton of work. Full disclosure, this morning was 5 straight hours of sanding with no break. My back is killing me, but 5 hours is what it took me to do 2 guitars and 2 necks. So I finished out the necks this morning when I hopped in the shop. So you may be a little bit slower if this is your first guitar. Take your time, don't rush, don't try and beat Greg. That's just where I am. I did use a DA on the bodies, and I used a DA on the back of this neck just to get it roughed, and then I finished everything by hand. So now both of these guitars are in 320. They are completely ready to paint. They'll just have to be masked off where they need masked off. This guitar is going to get grain filled. This guitar is not, so I'll show you those 2 different processes. Thanks for joining me for this episode. I hope you guys are having as much fun watching this and maybe following along with your own guitars as I am. Until next time, we'll see you.
If you would like more guitar-related content, click that subscribe button. If you want to follow the rest of this build, click the playlist to the right. And as always, visit skyscraperguitars.com for guitar tools and accessories.